Hi, I'm John, one of the Highrock pastors. I'm so glad to be with you today as we consider what God might have to say to us. I love that discussion question we shared earlier. How do you measure success? What does it mean to be a winner? Between my two oldest children, I think I coached 10 seasons of youth soccer. We worked hard to create a great experience for all the kids involved. Even so, most of the kids just wanted to win. Officially, we didn't even keep score, but every kid on the pitch knew exactly what the score was. They wanted to win. We coaches would try to define winning as showing up, playing as a team, and giving your best effort. But those kids had a different game in mind. Winning meant scoring more goals. Life is a lot more complex than youth soccer. Or is it? We talk about lofty goals like self-actualization or creating a legacy or leaving the world a better place than you found it. But is that what we really believe? Or, like the kids that I coached in youth soccer, do we just want to score more goals? What does it even mean to win? And if winning means having a higher score, then what counts as a goal for us? How do we measure success? At the Paris Olympics this summer, Nike unveiled their new "Winning Isn't for Everyone" ad campaign. The full ad starts with a shot of a determined adolescent girl, but then moves on to images of famous athletes like Kobe, LeBron, 100-meter Olympian Sha'Carri Richardson, Serena Williams, distance runner Jacob Ingebrigtsen, soccer superstar Mbappe. Meanwhile, the narrator Willem Dafoe repeatedly asks, "Am I a bad person? I'm single-minded. I'm deceptive. I'm obsessive. I'm selfish. Does that make me a bad person?" The pacing of the commercial accelerates. "I'm delusional. I'm maniacal. You think I'm a bad person? Tell me." And then it crescendos to a fever pitch. "I have no empathy. I don't respect you. I have an obsession with power. I think I'm better than everyone else. I have no remorse. I have no sense of compassion. What's mine is mine. I want to take what's yours and never give it back." Finally, the foreboding music swells to the victorious swells of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, along with one final statement: winning isn't for everyone. Talk about pulling back the curtain. We might pat ourselves on the back and prattle on about the spirit of Olympic sport or empowering slogans like "just do it," but in the end, it's all about winning. That commercial hit me in the gut because it exposed a hidden truth. They said the part that we know not to say out loud. The world keeps score. The kids I coached in soccer knew it, and they kept score too. Part of me was repulsed by that Nike ad, especially because it starts out with a young girl, as if we want her to carry on the same values. But another part of me thought, hey, Nike is just saying the quiet part out loud. Whatever else we might say in public, in private, in our hearts, don't we believe that winning is everything? We're all keeping score, aren't we? I heard this message early and often as a child. Like many immigrants, my mom valued objective measures like test scores as the path to success. That's the measure of our success, the measure of our worth. We're keeping score, and that's the score. And it was easy to believe in that score, considering all the standardized testing that we did as kids, and the testing to pass a class, to move on to the next grade, SATs and ACTs to get into college, especially to get into the right college. And I know I'm not alone. Working with parents and youth and young adults, I see so many kids under the same pressure to score goals, measurable goals. Whether it's on the field, in the gym, in the classroom, online with likes or subs, at work with a starting salary or body measurements or any number of other ways to measure our status. What's your score? Are you winning yet? Vince Lombardi, the famous coach of the Green Bay Packers, has a lot of famous quotes, especially about winning. But probably the most relevant to this moment is when he said, "If winning isn't everything, why do they keep score?" That push to win and to keep score, that all came at a cost for me. It was driving me to a breaking point. Only I didn't see it that way at the time. Maybe because one close friend had it even worse. He went to a prestigious private high school, then Princeton, then straight to Wall Street. He was winning. In all the ways that we were told to win, he was winning. Until one day, let's just say he found himself flying through a plate glass window, which landed him in a hospital under careful observation. After 3 days under their watchful eye, he realized he was happier with a broken body in the hospital than he was with the idea of going back to work. Even if that was winning, he was done with it. I know my friend and I are not alone. Maybe your body or your mind or maybe your spirit is keeping score and it's pushing you to the edge. We're currently in the middle of a series that explores what Jesus had to say to 7 prominent churches. These churches share many of the same admirable aspirations and many of the same shortcomings of churches today, including ours. And what's true of those churches is often true of us as individuals as well. Today we're going to look at Smyrna. Smyrna was a winner. Of the 7 churches in Revelation, only 2 received unqualified praise: Smyrna and Philadelphia. There are only 4 verses about Smyrna. It's not a lot, but these 4 short verses are rich in meaning once we understand some of the background. First off, Smyrna was a wealthy city. These 7 churches were all located in Asia Minor, what is now the western coast of modern-day Turkey. Looking a bit closer, we can see that all 7 churches were close enough to one another to be connected by a single road. Starting from Ephesus, then to Smyrna, walking that road, you would encounter all 7 churches of Revelation in exactly the same order that they are listed, starting with Ephesus and ending with Laodicea. The second thing you'll notice is that both Ephesus and Smyrna are on the coast. They are port cities. So, just like Ephesus, Smyrna was wealthy. There were guilds of goldsmiths, winemakers, textile producers, and merchants of all kinds. It was also a thriving cultural and academic center with an actual city library, a rare privilege in the ancient world. Smyrna was constantly competing with Ephesus in all these categories, but also constantly coming in second. So it's not wealth and prominence that makes them a winner. Remember, only Smyrna and Philadelphia receive unqualified praise from Jesus. So if it's not wealth or cultural prominence or academic excellence that made Smyrna a winner in God's eyes, then what was it? And wealth is definitely not the measure of this church, because even though the city itself was wealthy, Jesus acknowledges the Christian community was quite poor. He says, "I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich." They were wealthy in a way that you couldn't assign a number. They had no way to keep score. But why were they so financially impoverished in a city of such great wealth? Was it just the poor people who joined the church? It is true that many of these early churches were disproportionately filled with slaves and women, people who at the time could experience a rare kind of dignity only within the church. But we're going to see that some of the nearby churches like Laodicea were quite wealthy, so there's likely some other reason for their poverty. When Jesus says, "I know your afflictions and your poverty," it seems that the two are linked. They are poor because of their afflictions. It seems that the 2 churches that received unqualified praise were both churches experiencing heavy persecution. Jesus even encourages the believers in Smyrna to not be afraid what you are about to suffer. And it's the previous sentence about the synagogue of Satan, along with the historical records outside the Bible, that gives us a sense of what was going on. Back in the 1st century, Rome was at the height of its imperial power. And with that imperial power came the emperor cult, the worship of the Roman emperor as a god. Loyalty to Rome meant paying your taxes and offering worship to the emperor. But as empires go, Rome was pretty tolerant. As long as you didn't say anything about the rights of slaves or women, you could generally worship as you pleased, as long as you also worship the emperor. But for some faiths that existed before Rome, such worship was considered idolatry. So Rome grandfathered in some of these ancient faiths, and one of those faiths was Judaism. If you were a Jew, you could be a loyal subject and even a citizen of Rome without worshiping the emperor. And up until this point in time, followers of Jesus were regarded as a branch of Judaism. Jesus was a Jew. All the apostles were Jews. It had some new teachings, but it was still Judaism. So Christians were exempt from emperor worship as well. But the cities of the world were trying to outdo each other in emperor worship, all in the hopes of being selected as an imperial city, like how Ephesus won over Smyrna. But as Jews, or Christians as a sect of Judaism, you could live for different goals, a different score, if you will. The relationship between Jews and Gentiles in the church was strained from the beginning, and there were conflicts with local synagogues as well. But we get a sense from the book of Hebrews how local relations had broken down in some places. We read, "You suffered along with those who were thrown into jail, and when all you owned was taken from you, you accepted it with joy. You knew there were better things waiting for you that will last forever." So in some places, and likely in Smyrna at this time, being a Christian could mean not just paying a social cost, but paying a literal monetary and property cost as well. If the Jewish synagogue is saying that you're not Jewish, then you're no longer exempt from worshiping the emperor. And if you then refuse to worship the emperor, well, that's treason. Not to take too deep a dive into history, but it seems that most Roman officials were unlikely to persecute Christians unless there was pressure from informers. And in Smyrna, that seems to be exactly what was happening. Eventually, this persecution would famously lead to the death of Polycarp, the leader of the church in Smyrna and one of the disciples of the Apostle John, who wrote this letter. He was apparently burned alive when he refused to worship the emperor. Similarly, the people in Smyrna were facing the real possibility of death, which is why Jesus encourages them, saying, "Be faithful, even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown." A victor's crown presented to you by Jesus. You win. And there we have it. Even in matters of faith, there is a score. There is a secret to winning. It's not measurable like soccer goals, but it is clear. Be faithful. Be loyal. Be true even to the point of death, and you will win. Jesus himself will give you the crown of victory. Imagine how dire their situation must have been in Smyrna. To be betrayed by their religious cousins, kicked out of the synagogues and ratted out to the Roman authorities, and thus facing what appeared to be a no-win scenario. One option is to give up your faith by worshiping the emperor, and the other option is to keep the faith with God, but lose your status, your wealth, your freedom, and maybe even your life. How can you win when those are the choices? We can talk about God and community and all that, but in the end, we want to win, don't we? Not just in the next life, but in this one, right? Like my youth soccer players, we can talk about how teamwork is winning. We can talk about how showing up is winning, how putting in your best effort is winning. But in the end, scoring goals is the real win, right? The rest is just talk, isn't it? It's just so hard to believe that giving up on all the world's games and prizes and honors could ever be the path to actually winning. How can losing be winning? This whole idea of faithfulness as the real win must have seemed like a farce to some people. When faced with the loss of status, loss of freedom, loss of property, and the loss of your very life, why not just go along to get along? Couldn't I just pretend to worship the emperor while in my heart still worship Jesus? I mean, Jesus will forgive me, right? Pretty sure the emperor won't. The messages to 5 of the other churches will go into all these consequences of making those kinds of seemingly innocent compromises. The message to Smyrna focuses on the positive encouragement and promise for those who are willing to choose faithfulness as their score, for those who are willing to cling to perseverance and loyalty to Jesus as the path to truly winning. But in the face of such costly and even dire consequences, how can we be sure that these aren't just nice words to make us feel better, like all the reasons I tried to give my players not to keep score in our soccer games? The beginning and the end of the message to Smyrna gives us the answer. The sure and certain reward for faithfulness is grounded in Jesus himself. The foundation is built upon the rock, which is Christ. The letter to Smyrna begins, "To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again." In other words, Jesus wins. Jesus is first and last. He's the whole ball game. And he chose a path that looked like losing. His faithfulness led him to death on a cross. He died as a criminal, which must have been meaningful to those who were being sent to prison in Smyrna. In the world's eyes, by every score imaginable, Jesus was losing. Jesus was a loser. But death wasn't the end of his story, and it won't be the end of ours either, if we follow him. The story ends not with crucifixion, but with resurrection. Good Friday is not the end of the story. Easter is the conclusion and also the beginning of a new story. Your story and my story as we become part of Jesus' story. That's how the letter opens, with an impossible but undeniable victory of Jesus for us. Now let's look at how the letter closes. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious, that is, the one who is faithful even unto death, will not be hurt at all by the second death. We all die once. Despite the advances in medical science, the mortality rate still hovers at right around 100%. Those who are in Christ will go on to experience eternal life with God, never to face the second death, eternal death. I've shared with many of you before that my personal idols are cleverness and hard work. Whatever winning is, it's cleverness and hard work that are going to get me to that win. I wish I could say that Jesus' grace and love had just so overwhelmed me that I could see cleverness and hard work as the idols that they were. Don't get me wrong, they are valuable assets. But whenever I faced problems, challenges, and difficulties, my first response was to turn to them rather than God as the means to secure the good life for myself. Like I said, I wish it was just pure faith in Jesus that showed me how even though I was praising God, I was really trusting in myself. But that's not what happened. Instead, I had to learn the hard way. First, we had a third child, a daughter who is severely autistic. And it was a nightmare to take care of her while struggling to get her the services she needed, especially when she started to do things like wake up in the middle of the night and inexplicably try to climb out of the second-story window. Because she's entirely nonverbal, we still don't know why. And my wife, Amy, is by far the smallest and most frail person in our family and was hopelessly overpowered. Around the same time as Eliza's diagnosis of autism back in 2006, my wife received the news that she had a CDH1 mutation that caused a missense mutation in her E-cadherin protein. I didn't know what that means either. But I did know that this mutation and the cancer it caused was what killed Amy's mom at age 33. And for Amy, it has led to something like 20 surgeries, with at least 3 of those surgeries starting with an ambulance ride to the ER. I honestly lost count after a dozen. In the meantime, my brother Eugene, who had been a huge help to our family and a close friend to me, he passed away on Christmas 2008 from what I later figured out was an undiagnosed hyperglycemia. I like to think of his 54-ounce big gulp mug as the murder weapon. I almost kept it. And as a solo pastor of another church, I found myself unable to take care of myself, let alone minister to a congregation of deserving people. It all fell apart. Systematically, one by one, each challenge showed me that my cleverness and hard work were not going to lead to a win. If I played that game, I would surely lose. I wasn't dead, but it felt like it. I ended up in an outpatient program for depression and entered into therapy for a year before eventually finding myself in an oasis called Highrock. At the beginning of that crisis, it was hard to even imagine that everything that felt like death could be a path to life. Even though I'm a pastor who spends my days trying to imagine what Christ's resurrection power might mean in your moment of truth, I was at a total loss trying to hold on to God's light in my darkness. But it is precisely in those darkest moments that Jesus can teach us to trust him. It's in those moments when we feel like we're losing everything that we can discover what God gives can never be taken away. It's when God brings us through the valley of the shadow of death that we can start to believe that even death itself will not be able to separate us from the love of God. That's what I learned, what I experienced through all those losses. Yes, they were real losses, but what I gained, what my whole family gained, was the real win. When Nike said that winning isn't for everyone, they had no idea that they could be so right, but for all the wrong reasons. The self-promotion and triumph over others in that ad does not lead to winning in life. If that's the path we take, death will win. Once the game is done, it all goes back in the box. The only way to win and play again is to play the game of life the way Jesus did, not by climbing over others, but by descending into true greatness. Jesus humbled himself, made himself a servant of others, even to the point of dying for them. And that's why God gave him the victory. That's the truth we need to be told and retold until it takes hold. That's winning. And sadly, winning isn't for everyone. The final truth that Smyrna needed to hear, and what we need to hear, is this: Jesus wins. Everything I had trusted in for a win had failed me, and if I had held on to them, maybe I would have ended up like my friend who didn't come to his senses until he went through that plate glass window. Instead of turning first to cleverness and hard work, and let's be honest, especially cleverness, more and more, my first impulse now is to stop and be with Jesus. More and more, it means I pray first, then try to be clever and work hard, but also to continue praying in the meantime. And even before I get to those crisis moments, I now know that I need to get away, like when I go hiking, to be with Jesus, away from all the distractions. It's hard to be in love unless you get time together, so I have to make that time. Time away from all the messages that tell me, like that Nike commercial, that winning comes from unrestrained desire and self-promotion. It's time for me to embrace my mortality, to remember that I will die, just like everyone else. Life is like a board game sometimes, that even if I win in the world's eyes, when the game is over, it all goes back in the box. I am born into this life with only what the Lord gives me, and I will leave it in the same way. What good is it to win what I cannot keep if it costs me my integrity, my soul in the process? In those quiet, undistracted moments, I remember that Jesus carved a path to victory, and it leads to the cross. It leads to dying to self. It leads to putting others first because we put Jesus first and want to follow him, even when it leads to the cross. And it does lead to the cross. Jesus' story, which can be our story, doesn't end at the cross or even at the grave. There is a path to victory, and it's a path marked by trust, by allegiance to one who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. The believers in Smyrna were winning, even if the Roman world around them saw them as losers. They were winners in the eyes of Jesus, and Jesus promised to award them a crown of victory for all to see. I want that crown. I want to be in that winner's circle. I want to be there with all of you, celebrating together that we trusted Jesus enough to follow him on the path to true victory. Are you winning? What's your score? Jesus promises us that if we're willing to stop playing games and to pursue faithfulness with him, we will win. We will win because he won and will crown us in victory as well. That's the whole message of Revelation. No matter how it looks to us, Jesus wins. Know that truth. Live that truth. Jesus wins and wants to share his victory with you.